On the night of December 20th, 1987, the Tabla Strait, an ordinary stretch of Philippine water between Mindoro and the island of Tablas, flashed white. It was a burst followed by a sound that survivors still compare to the sky splitting. A ferry named MV Doña Paz and a small oil tanker called MT Vector had found each other in the worst possible way. In seconds, the sea itself seemed to catch fire. The people who jumped to live discovered they were leaping into burning water. This is the story of how that happened, how a routine overnight crossing, a holiday season crowd, and a chain of small lapses added up to an almost unbelievable loss of life. Roughly 4,300 dead, with only a handful of survivors. It's a story about ships and safety rules, yes, but more than that, it's about ordinary people travelling home and a system that let them down at every step. Start with the ferry. MV Doña Paz. Think of her as a workhorse of the archipelago. Nothing glamorous, but crucial. The Philippines is a country made of water and islands. Ferries are bridges you can board. Doña Paz had been built in Japan in the 1960s and later brought into Philippine service. Over the years she changed names and owners, eventually ending up with Sulpicio Lines, one of the major ferry operators of the era. She had the sturdy, practical look of ships built to carry both people and the everyday cargo that keeps island economies going. Sacks of rice, crates of soft drinks, boxes of instant noodles, baskets of fruit, the odd motorbike, whatever could be rolled, lifted or coaxed aboard. On that December day, the ship filled the way ships do before Christmas, fast, messy and beyond the neat arithmetic of ticket counters. The route traced a familiar arc from the eastern Visayas up toward Manila. People were headed to the capital for work or flying onward. Others were leaving it, returning to hometowns for the holidays. If you've ever taken a long, crowded bus or train right before a national holiday, you understand the vibe. Everyone looks tired, bags are bursting at the seams, and the air is a tangle of voices and smells: fried snacks, diesel, wet clothing, plastic. On a Philippine ferry in the 80s, add the strum of guitars, kids darting between legs, vendors making late sales, and a film playing in the lounge if the TV worked. There was an official passenger manifest, there always is, but everyone understood that the manifest was a polite fiction. In simple terms, a manifest is the ship's official list of passengers. It's supposed to tell you who's on board and how many. It also sets the baseline for life jackets and lifeboats, if the list is accurate. In practice, manifests in those days were often incomplete. Walk-on passengers could be waved aboard in the last minutes, tickets sold as the gangway came up. This was not unique to one company or one ferry. It was a culture of we can squeeze a few more, multiplied across a rush hour the size of a country. That night, numbers later suggested that Doña Paz carried far beyond her licensed capacity. Mothers and infants, teenagers with paper bags of gifts, seamen going home between contracts, students, grandparents with boxes taped like parcels from a decade earlier. Tired people. Real people. Meanwhile, out on the same water, the MT Vector, a small coastal tanker, was moving with a different cargo. Fuel, gasoline and kerosene, refined products bound for distribution. A tanker, in plain terms, is a ship built to carry liquids in bulk. If it's crude oil, it's heavy and slow to ignite. If it's gasoline, vapor can be explosive. The Vector was loaded with volatile cargo whose vapors can ignite from a spark. Later investigations would find that the Vector's paperwork and crew qualifications did not meet the standards they should have, and that its equipment and watchkeeping, the basic lookout duty, fell short. But on the water that night, the Vector was simply another silhouette in a busy sea. Picture the scene: a tropical night, hot but breezy, the kind where the horizon doesn't exist so much as fade. Navigation lights blink, the red and green position lights that tell other ships which way you're pointing, the white lights that say, "This is my length." Radar screens sweep, a proper watch, a term that basically means the people actively looking and listening so we don't hit anything. keeps eyes on the world. Ahead, abeam, astern. Ships cross with miles to spare all night long, and nobody on deck notices. On Doña Paz, people prepared to sleep. Balikbayans, Filipino workers returning from abroad, shared seats with farmers, street vendors and children who could sleep anywhere. The deck smelled faintly of salt and oil and something sweet that might have been oranges. Crew members, as some survivors later remembered, appeared relaxed. There was no sense of danger. That too is ordinary. Disaster almost always hides in the ordinary. The time was around late evening, close to 10:30 p.m. There's a particular stillness the sea has at that hour. You can hear distant engines as a distant hum. Then came the jolt. Not the crushing blow of a head-on collision, but a glancing impact that nevertheless ripped metal and opened the Vector's fuel tanks. Imagine a steel hull as a tough aluminum can. Now imagine another can smacking it at speed. It tears. On the Vector, the cargo, gasoline and kerosene, escaped in a rush that turned the surface into a shimmering film. Vapour, heavier than air, pooled and spread. Some disasters unfold like slow arguments. This one went like a match to dry paper. A spark, no one can be sure from where, perhaps metal scraping metal, perhaps a lit cigarette, perhaps damaged electrical gear, found vapour, and the vapour answered. Flames flashed across the fuel slick. On Doña Paz, passengers saw a wash of light rolling toward them, a sheet with an orange centre, then heat, wind, screams and smoke. The ship's interior, full of plastic seats and synthetic fabrics, fed the flames. The tanker's fuel turned the sea into a burner. Think about choices in that moment. You're woken by a slam and a scream. You step onto a corridor and smoke burns your throat. The lights blink, maybe die. Someone is shouting, someone is crying, someone is praying. Heat pushes through the wall like a hand. The nearest stairwell is already choked with people. Another stairwell is a chimney. You remember that life jackets are locked up or stowed where only a crew member can access them. You head for the open deck, where the night air is now not air at all, but smoke. You hear the pops, paint blistering, windows cracking. You see the water, and it's dotted with orange. That orange is not life jackets, it is the sea on fire. Survivors describe making impossible choices. Some wrapped wet shirts over their faces. Some tried to find their children in the crush, and couldn't. Some jumped and trusted the physics of movement over a fire, the idea that water farther from the slick would be cooler, that if you could swim out from under the heat you might have a chance. Many could not swim or were weighted with bags or injured in the rush. Steel conducts heat. Decks got hot enough to blister. A few crew members tried to fling out life rings, others were as stunned as the passengers. One common memory threads through survivor testimonies. There were no clear instructions, no loudspeaker orders, no organised mustering. In peacetime shipping, a muster is the drill where everyone gathers at a lifeboat station. On Doña Paz, the muster existed in the manuals. It didn't materialise on that deck. People leapt into the sea, some in groups, some alone, many holding hands. The first seconds were relief. The second second was the realisation that the water was burning in iridescent patches. Gasoline floats. On fire, it crawls over wavelets like a living thing. To escape it, you go under. Underwater is cooler but also dark and disorienting. The choice becomes a rhythm. Dive beneath the flames, swim blind, surface in a gap, gulp air that hurts, dive again. Those who lived speak of the noise, the Vector's tanks rupturing, secondary explosions, the hiss and roar of burning fuel, as a sound you feel in your bones. Other ships were in the area. Some saw the glow and altered course. Some did not realise what exactly had happened in time to help. The official distress calls were muddled. Later reports said Doña Paz's radio was not functioning properly, or that the radio was unmanned, or that whatever signals were sent did not prompt an immediate, coordinated rescue. This is one of those points where the details diverge in retellings, but the end result is brutally certain. Help came late. Fishing boats drawn by firelight and instinct pulled people from the water as dawn rose. By then, the count of survivors would be measured in 24 names, not hundreds. Some were so burned that their families recognized them by voices or the shapes of their hands. By morning, the Tabla Strait held debris and a slick rainbow sheen. Bodies floated, many wearing no life jackets at all. Ferries in those days, and too often still today, carried life jackets in numbers that matched the official manifest, not the actual load. If the manifest said 1,500 and you had 3,000 aboard, your margin of error was people. Then the shock turned to paperwork. Governments convene boards of inquiry, companies hire lawyers, reporters tally names, numbers crystallize out of rumour. The most repeated number today is approximately 4,300 dead, so large that it's easy to lose the human scale. Think of a mid-sized town wiped off the map in a night, and remember that the real number is a shadow because the manifest was wrong. People boarded without tickets. Some families, unrecorded, vanished together and were never officially counted. In a tragedy at sea, missing often quietly becomes dead. The Board of Marine Inquiry in the Philippines examined the case. They looked at charts, rules of the road, in maritime terms, the coal regs, the collision regulations that tell ships who should turn where and when, watch schedules, crew certifications, and the condition of both vessels. They considered the vector's status, questions about its license, the training of its crew, the state of its equipment. They looked at the ferry's load and the actions of its bridge team, who was on the bridge, what they saw, when they saw it. The conclusion that eventually made its way through official channels and courts assigned primary blame to the vector, unseaworthy, improperly manned, and carrying a lethal cargo with lax oversight. The ferry operator was severely criticised for the overloading and safety lapses, but in the legal outcomes that followed, the vector's owners carried the legal fault for the collision itself. People still debate that because law and justice rarely map perfectly onto the lived facts of grief. Compensation followed in the way compensation does: slow, partial, complicated. Families lined up with documents and photographs to prove that a name existed, that a life was lived, that someone who walked aboard now needed to be accounted for on a ledger. Payments, where they came, were often described as insultingly small, cut by the logic of liability limits and proof that could not be produced because everyone who might have spoken for the deceased had vanished in the same fire. In the Philippines of the late 1980s, that was not unusual. It was the water everyone swam in, administratively speaking. Crowded offices, stamps, files, pleas. If the disaster was simply an anomaly, one awful night caused by an unlucky crossing, it would still be a catastrophe. But it was also a mirror. It reflected patterns that people recognized but had not fixed. Overloading driven by demand and profits. Crew training that emphasized routine more than emergencies. Regulators who inspected on paper more than in steel and sweat. A culture that accepted that rules were suggestions until something burned. In maritime safety, there's a concept called the Swiss cheese model. Imagine layers of cheese stacked so that their holes don't line up. Each layer is a defense: training, equipment, regulation, maintenance. An accident happens when the holes do line up. On December 20th, 1987, the holes aligned all the way through. In the months after the disaster, there was public anger and grief, but also normalization, because life in an archipelago requires ferries and people cannot just stop crossing water. Ferries continued to run. Over time, some rules tightened. Inspections got louder. There were campaigns about not overloading. Yet if you look at maritime news from the region in the decades since, you still see headlines that rhyme with Doña Paz. Overloaded vessels, typhoon crossings, engine room fires, lifeboats that jam when tested by real panic. The company that owned Doña Paz, Sulpicio Lines, later known as Philippine Span Asia Carrier Corporation, would be linked to other high-profile tragedies. Different years, different ships, similar questions, highlighting how stubborn safety problems can be. So, how do you tell this story without getting lost in numbers? Maybe you do it through snapshots. A father ties a handkerchief over his daughter's mouth to filter smoke. It helps a little. He lifts her to the railing and tells her they will jump together on 3. He counts. On 2, she is already in the air because she cannot stand the heat. He laughs about it later, in the way some survivors laugh when the alternative is to break. A young man remembers a film playing earlier in the lounge and how, for hours, the biggest worry in that room was boredom. He ends the night clinging to a piece of wood, looking up at flames, thinking the ship is a building on land that somehow caught fire, and that he is floating in a reservoir near his hometown. Trauma does strange things to geography. A crew member tries to unfasten a rack of life jackets using a key he cannot find. He has done this procedure a dozen times, in daylight, calm. Now the clip won't give, his fingers slide, and people are tugging at him from all directions. He cannot hear his own breath. A mother holds 2 children at once. She's strong, but the water and the motions are stronger. She must decide which child to let go of for a second to adjust her grip. There's no right answer. She will be judged by someone who was not there. A fisherman wakes to an orange dawn and smells the air and knows before he sees it that something heavy has burned on the water. He starts his boat anyway. He tells his son to hand over a towel and to be ready to pull, and the son nods because he has never not nodded to his father. Accidents have causes. They are chains that can be broken at many points. That night, the chain could have been broken by a radar watch that noticed traffic converging and altered course earlier. It could have been broken by a properly maintained radio coordinating a quicker rescue effort. It could have been broken by rigorous control of passenger numbers that kept exits and decks usable. It could have been broken by a sober insistence months before that a tanker carrying gasoline at night meet every standard to the letter. None of those breaks occurred. The holes lined up. What do we do with a disaster like this decades later? Memory has a half-life. Outside the Philippines, where the name Doña Paz still punches the air out of a room, many people have never heard of it. If you open a list of maritime tragedies, it sits at or near the top for peacetime loss of life. Yet the world's storytelling machine has not given it the kind of mythic weight that, say, Titanic carries. There are reasons. The victims were largely poor and brown. The photos were few. The narrative did not include an orchestra and a tuxedoed captain. It happened at night in a place the global north often ignores. But the water doesn't care about those hierarchies. It took mothers, sons, grandfathers, nurses, students, vendors, mechanics. It took with the same in different physics. To tell the story properly is also to tell what changed and what didn't. In the wake of the collision, Philippine maritime authorities came under pressure to tighten enforcement on crew certifications, vessel seaworthiness, manifests. Internationally, the disaster underscored lessons already written into the SOLAS Convention, short for Safety of Life at Sea, the core global maritime safety treaty. Drills, means of escape, fire control, watchkeeping standards. But the gap has never just been in the regulations, it's in whether regulations are treated as ritual or reality. The ferry industry has improved in many places with better training and technology. The fact that another Doña Paz has not happened at the same scale is not an accident. Yet smaller echoes continue, and each echo says the same thing. Safety lives in the unglamorous details, counting heads honestly, maintaining gear, practicing the drill until it's muscle memory, and expecting that if something can ignite, some night it will. When you travel by sea today in the Philippines, you can still board a ferry where the paint is bright but the age shows in the joints. You can still watch the dance of loading and think, is this wise? And you can still meet crew who take real pride in doing things right. Change is uneven, but it is also cumulative. Every time a crew member insists on a head count that matches the actual number of humans aboard, every time an officer calls for a slowdown because of a radar target that looks wrong, every time a regulator climbs a gangway and checks not just the paperwork but the actual hose connections and alarms, the odds shift. There's a quiet epilogue to many disasters, memorials, names on walls, annual ceremonies. In towns across the Philippines, December 21 has become a date that families remember, even if the country's front pages sometimes do not. Candles on windowsills, prayers that the sea be gentle. A few survivors meet and speak, and their voices do a job that official documents cannot. They describe the heat, the light, the breathless underwater calm. They remember strangers who held them up. They remember screams fading, which is how silence begins. And they remember being pulled into a small boat by hands they never saw again. If you were to stand today on a ferry deck at night and look out over the Tablas Strait, you'd see darkness and scattered stars. The water would look the same as any other night. The sea does not memorialize. The deadliest peacetime ferry disaster wasn't a mystery with a clever twist. It was an avoidable collision inflamed by explosive cargo and multiplied by human systems that looked the other way. And if the story leaves you with an image, let it be the smallest one. A fisherman's boat at dawn, blackened figures being lifted aboard, shaken hands pouring water over their heads, someone saying, "Salamat, thank you," between coughs. Survival is a human chain. So is prevention.